Hi, and welcome to another Enrichment with the Gifted Guy. What we're going to be talking about today is middle grade and juvenile fiction series of books that are interesting to read. And so, what I'm going to do is start talking about middle grade books. So, if you are a juvenile fiction or if you are older, then you can go ahead and skip ahead in the video and to where I'm talking about those. But the first half, I'll be talking about middle grade series, and then I'll eventually get into juvenile fiction series. So, the first middle grade series I'm going to talk about is called Encyclopedia Brown. Encyclopedia Brown was 29 books in the series, and they were written by Donald Sobel. And the main character, whose name was Encyclopedia Brown, was called that because he was really smart. He knew more information than encyclopedia, so that's how he got his nickname. And he solved mysteries that took place, and he did this in one of two ways. One was he ran a detective agency for kids, and kids would come in and they would have like maybe something was stolen or something had happened, and he would have to try to solve that. But the second type of mystery that he would solve is his dad was the chief of police, and his dad would come home and he would present the case to Encyclopedia, and it would take him the length of the time it took them to eat dinner. And at the end of dinner, each time he always had solved the case. And he uses deductive reasoning and to solve his cases. And so the nice thing about them is that you could pick up book number 17 and read it, and you wouldn't be lost in what's going on, because the way the books are set up, they're not really a novel or anything. They are short stories within those books, and so you read each one. They don't really lead into one another either. It does develop some of the characters, but you could read any book in the series and still know what's going on. And the main character, like I said, is Encyclopedia Brown. There's his parents. There's his sidekick, whose name is Susie. She's kind of this, or Sally. She's this really tough girl who helps him out. And then there's the kind of the antagonist is Bugs Meany. He is a member of a gang called the Tigers, and they cause a lot of havoc. And he's usually Encyclopedia is usually catching Bugs Meany as the person who did it in a lot of cases. The next series I would like to talk about is called Dork Diaries. And this is a series that's written by Rachel Renee Russell, and it has 12 books in the series at this point. The story is about a girl by the name of Nikki, and she's a middle schooler, and the books are written in a diary format. So there's lots of doodlings and drawings and comic strips, as well as writing. And what it's doing is following her life day in and day out as she makes friends and deals with middle school, has a crush, deals with teachers, deals with her parents. And so it just follows the life of this character, and the kind of getting her way through her middle school years. The next series I'm going to talk about is Choose Your Own Adventure books. Choose Your Own Adventure books were hundreds of books, and they were written by different authors. There were some authors that wrote several books in the series, but the books were not connected in any way. In other words, book one didn't lead to book two, and so on and so forth. What they had in common was the formatting. In the Choose Your Own Adventure books, what would happen is if you were reading the book, you would go along, and it was told in second person, so it was like you were in the shoes of this protagonist, and the protagonist would come to a decision that they had to make, and it would actually give you two to three decisions to choose from as the reader. And it said, if you want this, decide this, go to this page. If you decide this, go to that page. If you decide this, go to that page. And so you got to kind of control the action of the story, and how the character was making decisions, and how that was then driving the action of the books. And the books, some were supernatural, some were adventure stories, some were realistic, some were far fetched because they're on another planet. But the idea behind them, and the reason why I like them especially, is because as someone who wanted to be a writer, I could read these stories and kind of tell the story. I could make the decisions and how the story went, and so it taught me kind of how to make good decisions to keep moving the book forward, which is what authors kind of have to do. So I really enjoyed it for that reason. There's kind of two versions of Choose Your Own Adventure. They're the original ones that came out back in the 1980s, and they have since gone out of print. But then eventually what happened is the rights got bought by another company, and they re-released a lot of the books, not all of them, but a lot of the books. And so you can still find them in bookstores today. Our next series is called The Magic Misfits by Neil Patrick Harris. It's a four-book series, and it tells the story of this street magician by the name of Carter who runs away from an uncle who is doesn't treat him very well, and he stumbles across these friends who all have uh, abilities to do magic. And this is not magic in the sense of mystical magic. This is they can it's sleight of hand, it's illusions, it's things like that. And so this ragtag bunch of magic misfits kind of band together to try to stop people who are doing things that they shouldn't be doing. It's written by Neil Patrick Harris, and I really like this series because, in addition to being good stories, it also teaches you magic tricks. So he'll the story will stop for a second, and the main character will teach you a card trick, and then you can try that card trick out with your family and friends. So I really like that there are parts of the book that are interactive and that you can kind of take a break from the book and then try to do some magic. Our next series is called The 39 Clues, and this is a series of 10 books, each one written by a different author. The first one was written by Rick Riordan, who is kind of famous for the Percy Jackson series and the Red Pyramid, amongst other series. And then from there, a different author wrote each subsequent book. There was a basic outline to go on, but they could write it on their, and make decisions on their own until there were 10 books in the series. The series follows two main characters who are Amy and Dan Cahill, and they are a member of a famous family actually. And there are four clans that are vying for. They're traveling across the world and finding clues and trying to find this ultimate treasure or prize that is teased at. And the four clans are the Tomas, Ekaterina, Janice, and Lucian. And so what will happen is these different clans, different members of the different clans will run into one another. Some will work together, some will try to stop the other. And so it's this clue hunt, basically. And there's actually additional series after this first series, but I've not read those. I've only read the first series, and the first series was pretty well done. This next series is not as well known as some of the other series, but it's one that I really enjoyed. It's called the first one is called The Puzzling World of Winston Breen, and it's written by a man by the name of Eric Berlin, and he wrote three books in the series. The second one's called The Potato Chip Puzzle, and then the last one's called The Puzzler's Mansion. And the premise is basically the same. That Winston Breen, who is this kid who's really good at solving puzzles, a young kid, and he is tasked with a mystery where he must use his puzzling skills in order to get through the situation. And so as a result, the he's always getting into situations where a puzzle must be used. And what's really cool about it is the book lets you try to solve the puzzle before Winston. So it will say, here's the puzzle that Winston has to solve, and it gives you a version of that. And there's an answer key in the back, and you can make an attempt on your own to try to solve these puzzles as well. So it's somewhat interactive. And that's why I really like the book. And the characters are really good as well. And I just like puzzles. So this is one that kind of spoke to me. This next series is called the Goosebumps series, and these are written by author R.L. Stine. And there are 62 books in the Goosebumps series. And again, they are not necessarily connected. There are sequels to certain characters. So, Slappy, who is this ventriloquist dummy, has several books within the 62 books. And so on and so forth, but some of them are just standalones, and they're like basically kids horror books where kids are a scarecrow is chasing them, or like I said, there's the ventriloquist dummy, there's the invisible boy, there's all the abominable snowman. So there's all sorts of adventures in these Goosebumps books. The next series is starting to transition from middle grade to junior juvenile fiction and teen fiction. Percy Jackson can be read by, I would say, fourth and fifth graders all the way up to eighth grade. So it kind of straddles that. And the Percy Jackson series is made up of five books. They're written by Rick Riordan, and the five books in there are The Lightning Thief, The Sea of Monsters, The Titan's Curse, The Battle of the Labyrinth, and The Last Olympian. The main character, of course, is Percy Jackson, and he finds out early in the first book that he is the son of Poseidon, the Greek god, and that the Greek gods really exist. And what he finds is there are other children of these Greek gods that exist and are on our planet, and they all go to this camp called Camp Half Blood, where they spend a lot of time, learning how to use their powers that they have as children of Greek gods. And then there are a lot of quests and adventures that take place within these books, such as trying to stop Ares, the god of war, from taking over the world. The Sea of Monsters, they have to, find the Golden Fleece, and there are different adventures through all of them. And Percy Jackson has been in other series as well by Rick Riordan. Rick Riordan has done a few series that I haven't mentioned here, but they're pretty good. The Kane Chronicles, there's the Hero of Olympus, there's the Magnus Chase, and then there's the Trials of Apollo. And the Trials of Apollo is where Percy Jackson turns up as a minor character in that book. I'm going to use the Harry Potter series to take us from middle grade to juvenile and teen fiction. The reason being is Harry Potter is made up of seven books, and those books are The Philosopher's Stone, The Chamber of Secrets, Prisoner of Azkaban, The Goblet of Fire, The Order of the Phoenix, The Half-Blood Prince, and wraps up with The Deathly Hallows. What's really interesting about these books is The Philosopher's Stone and Chamber of Secrets are middle grade books. They are the Harry Potter and his crew are much younger. The adventures they get into aren't as dangerous. There isn't as much violence and death as there is in later books. And so the nice thing about this series is when J.K. Rowling, who's the author of these books, was writing them, the kids were growing that were her audience. The kids that were reading these books were growing up, and so Harry Potter and his friends, Hermione and Ron Weasley, are growing up as well, and so they're getting into more older situations. So a love interest, comes about halfway through, as happens more in teen than in middle grade, and so it's a really interesting book series in that it's growing up as it goes along. And most people know what Harry Potter is. If you've not read it, I highly recommend it. But Harry Potter is a wizard, and he gets introduced to this wizarding world, which includes Hogwarts, which is this wizarding academy that kids go to, and people who are not wizards are called Muggles. And there's this whole he who must not be named, who's Voldemort, who is the antagonist of this whole series, who had killed Harry's parents and now is trying to destroy Harry and the world. And Harry has to try to stop him through this series. The next series is called the Shadow Children series, and these are written by Margaret Peterson Haddix. And there are seven books in the series. I call this the Among the series because every title begins with Among the. There's Among the Hidden, Among the Impostors, and so on and so forth. And so you get the Among the Free. But this does take place in this dystopian country. This is more upper middle grade and lower junior high, so fifth, sixth, and seventh grade. Because although the books are short, they do have a little more mature content than some of the other middle grade books. But the basic premise of these series of books is that there is a food shortage in this dystopian future. And so the government has enacted a law that says you can only have two children. And any child that you have in addition to those two children can be killed, imprisoned. And these children are known as shadow children because they're not supposed to be born. There are different main characters in most of the books. For instance, Luke, who's the protagonist of the first book, Among the Hidden, is also in the second book, which is Among the Impostors. And then he also is the protagonist in Among the Barons, which is the fourth book. But the third book is the main character is Nina, who's a girl, and she is a shadow child. And then Trey is the protagonist for Among the Brave, and Matthias is the protagonist for Among the Enemy. And what's neat is that you get to see these different perspectives of this same situation of what's going on. So you get the full picture as a result. The next series is written by Ransom Riggs. And Ransom Riggs is an interesting author. He was more into photography and he was going to make a picture book. But then he decided to turn it into a novel, which is called Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children. And so what he did was he found a lot of old photographs and photographs of his own, and they kind of told the story. So what happened is he came up with a plot where the main character uses his grandfather's old photographs in order to try to solve this mystery. And so there are pictures, like real pictures, throughout the um, the book. And then there's the namesake, this home for peculiar children, where a bunch of children with peculiar abilities live. Jacob, who's the main character, can see monsters. You have another person who can be invisible, another one that has superhuman strength, one that can resurrect the dead. So the kids at this particular school all have these peculiar abilities. And so what you have in this series of books, which is also Hollow City, and there's a third and a fourth one as well. And in these peculiar children are trying to figure out mysteries or solve the problems that have been put in front of them. The Maze Runner is next, and this is a series written by James Dashner. And there are three books in the main series: The Maze Runner, The Scorched Trials, and The Death Cure. And then there are prequels. One is called The Kill Order, and one is called The Fever Code. And the premise of this takes place in a dystopian future, which a lot of these teen books seem to. And the first book in particular, I thought was very good. What happened in this? These kids who are known as number of teenagers who are known as gladers have been put in this place, which they call the glade. And there are walls, and these open at certain times during the day. And when they're closed, you hear these awful sounds of these creatures that are in this maze. Um, and so they have to figure out how to get out of this maze that they've been placed in. And then there's an additional plot twist where it's been all boys up to this point, and then all of a sudden a girl is left, and it claims that she's the last one to be left. And so they feel compelled to get out of there even more so. And then they eventually get out of there. And in the Scorched Trials and the Death Cure, they are trying to find out what caused the world to be the way it is, and then try to join forces and fight against this organization known as Wicked, who is the one who caused it. The Uglies is the name of our next series, and this is written by Scott Westerfield. It originally consisted of three books: Uglies, Pretties, and Specials. And then he wrote a fourth book called Extras. And this is, again, a dystopian future novel series. And there's this main character named Tally. And the way this society is set up is when you turn 16, up until this point, you've lived in a kind of a ratty part of town, and the situation and it's not good, and you just try to get by. And then when you turn 16, you get to go to this really nice part of town, and you get plastic surgery, which makes you a pretty. And those who there, everyone is forced at age 16 to get this plastic surgery, and those who run and try not to get it are known as uglies. And the first book is mostly about Tally finding out that a friend of hers escaped and went to live in a place where there were other uglies, and then she is forced to go find these because the government is trying to prevent these uglies from existing. The next series is a pretty popular one. It's called Twilight, and it consists of four books. It was written by Stephanie Meyer, and the first book is Twilight, and then followed by New Moon, and then Eclipse, and then Breaking Dawn. And similar to the Harry Potter books, these books kind of grew with their the audience. So originally, when they started, they were for girls who were just turning teenagers, and then by the time you get to the fourth book, it's more mature situations where older children should be the ones reading them. And the basic premise behind these books are: there's this girl named Bella, and she lives in Forks, Washington. She's just moved there. When she moves there, she discovers that there's this Cullen family, and a really handsome boy named Edward is in the Cullen family. And then she comes to find that they're vampires. And these are not your traditional vampires. First off, they're not evil in any way. They can go out in the sun, and there are other things that are different than your typical vampire, legend and folklore. Um, and so what happens in the first book is another vampire comes along, and Bella apparently smells really good for vampires because the Cullen family are vegetarians. They only drink blood from animals. They call them vegetarians, even though but they don't drink the blood from humans. And there are other vampires who don't abide by that, and one of them is hunting Bella, and the Cullen family has to try to stop them. And then the second one, the girlfriend of that guy is the antagonist, and they have to try to stop her. And in addition to all of this, there is a race of werewolves. A boy by the name of Jacob is just becoming one of these werewolves. And these werewolves and vampires kind of don't like one another, but they have to learn to live with one another. And it's Bella trying to choose between Edward, who is a vampire, and Jacob, who is a werewolf, and which one will she choose? The next series is the Hunger Game trilogy, and I'm a real big fan of these books. They're really well written. They're by Suzanne Collins, and there are 3 books in the series: The Hunger Games, Catching Fire, and Mockingjay. And there's going to be a prequel coming out that they're calling the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. But this takes place in the dystopian future, and there are different districts, and each of these districts are kind of in charge of a certain thing. So one is the farming district, one is the mining district, and the district number 1 is where all the rich people live. And as the districts go further and further out, they get poorer and poorer and poorer. And so in order to thin the herd, they have what are called the Hunger Games. Every year, a boy and a girl from each of the districts must, they pull their names from a cauldron, and they must go and then do battle against one another. So they are put in this arena, and this is what's called the Hunger Games. And the last person left standing alive is the winner of the Hunger Games. And so this is definitely a older teen book. It's fairly violent in that the kids trying to kill one another, but it also is it's a play on reality television and what we're willing to do for reality television. The second book goes back to the arena eventually. That happened All Stars edition of the Hunger Games, and then in the third one, it's about Katniss, who is the main character trying to overthrow this government that has caused this big difference between the have and the have-nots. The series that I have presented so far were written with middle grade readers or teen readers in mind, and that was the audience that they were intending to hit when they wrote these books. These next 2 series, that is not the case. They were written for adults to read, but a lot of teens like these books, and that the subject area is not too mature, but it is mature enough that it's going to challenge someone with their reading. And the first one of these is called The Lord of the Rings, and this is a trilogy by J.R.R. Tolkien. And the 3 books are The Fellowship of the Ring, The Two Towers, and The Return of the King. And the idea of this book is the main protagonist is named Frodo, and he's got 3 he's a hobbit, and he has 3 hobbit friends as well. And they're given this task of finding this ring before the antagonist of the story, the Dark Lord Sauron, finds it. He had created this ring to rule them all, and he wants to conquer Middle Earth, which is where they live. And Frodo specifically lives in a part of this called the Shire. And so he goes on this quest with his 3 other hobbits. He's aided on this quest in addition with other characters such as Gandalf, who's a wizard, and then there's an elf archer. And so they're setting off on this quest in this fantasy world. The final series I want to offer to you is one that is one of my very favorites, which is Sherlock Holmes series. And this encompasses four novels: Study in Scarlet, The Sign of the Four, The Hound of the Baskervilles, and The Valley of Fear. And then there are five short story collections. In each one of those, there are anywhere from 15 to 20 some stories, short stories. And the main character in all of these is the name of Sherlock Holmes. And most of you know who Sherlock Holmes is. He's a man who is a private detective, and the police or the royalty or people come to him with really bizarre mysteries, and then he seeks out to try to solve those mysteries. And he has the power of deductive reasoning, and that he sees things that other people don't. So he can tell a lot about a person just by looking at certain signs of them. So, for instance, he may know that they're left-handed because their left hand is slightly bigger than their right hand, and only he would notice something like that. So he's quite a peculiar guy, but he's brilliant, and he also uses science and forensics to try to solve crime as well. Helping him along the way is Watson, who is a doctor who is kind of is the narrator of most of these tales.